I'd like to welcome Yogani to Truth from the Source. We're now on part 8 on the path to enlightenment. This part of the series is called Self-Inquiry, Dawn of the Witness and the End of Suffering. Yogani, welcome.
Hi, Dr. Ann. It's great to be with you again.
Yeah, this is wonderful. Now we are going even deeper onto the path of enlightenment, and self-inquiry is a whole new subject for us to dive into. So what is different about this particular part?
Well, it's very interesting because self-inquiry relates to a path of yoga called Jnana Yoga, which means the yoga of knowledge, which implies the mind.
Yes.
And it's also attached with a field of not a field of yoga, but a field of Indian philosophy called Vedanta, and more specifically Advaita Vedanta, which is the path of non-duality. Advaita means non-dual, or wholeness, oneness.
Yes.
And so Jnana Yoga, which is part of yoga, and Advaita Vedanta, which is a separate philosophy within the Indian systems, those relate to self-inquiry and the use of the mind to transcend the mind. But, on a practical level, we see it every day because it boils down to questioning who we are and what we're doing here, which is a question we posed at the very beginning of the AYP lessons. And we've been applying a lot of practices and so forth along the way. But in the end, you get back to the question, who am I? What am I doing here? And in between the original question and then actually getting to the end of that, there's a whole lot of purification and opening that has to occur in the nervous system, which is a little bit different approach than you see with the sort of Neo-Advaita teachers that are around today. And by Neo-Advaita, I mean the new Advaita teachers that we see on the scene, like Eckhart Tolle and Adyashanti, and I guess Krishnamurti was one of the first of that type. And these are teachers who, for the most part, say, be who you are, and that's the most important thing. And there's less emphasis on meditation and things like that. So we can get into that as we move along.
You stress the importance of practice, even though the state of enlightenment doesn't need anything, it just simply is. So why practice at all?
Well, most of us have taken high school physics, and most high school physics classes cover quantum physics, which basically says that everything that we're looking at is energy, and behind the energy is emptiness. That's the reality of our world.
Yes.
Everything we look at is, 99.99999 and a long series of nines. Empty space. It's just energy, and out of that emptiness, our world is created through our sensory perception and our thinking about it and our the feelings we have about it. And that whole process is internal within us. When you think about it, everything that we experience is experienced in our mind, projected on our consciousness. We don't really have a direct connection with what's going on around us except through our senses and through our thinking and our feelings. So, so it's very logical to say, well, everything is emptiness and everything comes out of oneness and everything is connected. But that's not necessarily the way we experience it as it's projected on our consciousness within us through our senses and so forth. And the reason it's not seen that way is because we're identified with our thoughts and our sensory perceptions and our feelings. And in becoming identified with that process, those processes, we begin to think that we are the physical thing that we're experiencing, the body-mind, if you will. And so consciousness comes and says, I am the body-mind, and everything else is something else. I'm the subject, and everything else out there is the object. And that's the duality that we talk about. And then self-inquiry brings you to recognize the non-duality, or the oneness of all of this. But it's not an intellectual process, and this is where we get into a little bit of a problem with the way this is taught now. The way it's taught now is you're given all of that, and then you're told, believe it, That's what you are. You are beyond all that. You are the consciousness. You are the field of emptiness. You are the oneness. Now believe it. Be here now, right?
Yes.
And so people hear that and they're very inspired. Well, yeah, that's great. This makes a lot of sense. But then how do you become that? And then there's a sort of a rub, there's a sort of a conflict. And so people begin to hammer away at that intellectually, and there's a tendency to be building big castles in the air with the intellect. And then you're actually, by trying to create enlightenment, you're obstructing it.
Uh-huh.
This is a problem. Yeah, this is a problem with the path being totally oriented to the intellect.
Yes.
So in AYP, we say, okay, we need to strengthen the consciousness within the body-mind so that it can identify with itself as separate from all of these experiences of objects. And so we meditate. And when we meditate, we develop some inner silence that abides with us, and we begin to realize that that's what we are, and we begin to see our own thoughts and feelings and sensory perceptions as objects outside of our consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're in a position to begin inquiring. But this meditation, this cultivation of the witness, tends to get downplayed in many paths of self-inquiry. And so AYP takes a different approach. We develop the witness, the abiding inner silence, and then we look at self-inquiry much more closely later on in the path.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the lessons in AYP is called self-inquiry, from inspiration to realization. So you have inspiration in the beginning and you have realization at the end. But in between, you have this whole long process of purification and opening that enables the realization.
Yes. And for any of our listeners who have just joined us, these tools that we're talking about have been described in detail and are described in detail on the recordings that we've done in the past, which you can get to on AYP site.
There are over 300 free lessons on the website, which is aypsite.org. That's aypsite.org. There are many free lessons there, and also all of the books can be found there as well. We also have quite a large community of practitioners from many different backgrounds who are communicating in a large public support forum as well.
Yes, fantastic. So what happens when the identification with the object of perception has actually ceased, is no longer happening?
Well, the ideal end of the situation is that you come to know that you are that you are this infinite, eternal field of awareness, which is beyond the body.
And are you knowing it at all times?
It's a state of being, and it affects conduct.
Mm-hmm.
In that the nature of our inner silence and our innate awareness is bliss, and it's also love. So it's very close to traditional definitions of God being love.
Yes.
And the source of what we are being love. So the stillness, while it is unmanifest, as soon as it begins to move within the field of relativity, it expresses as love and bliss, an outpouring of compassion, to put it in Buddhist terms.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more you become that and know that you're that,
mm-hmm.
Not intellectually, but just
From
as
the
your
heart.
natural state of being,
Yes.
Your conduct becomes more along the lines of what we're aware of saints doing over the centuries,
mm-hmm.
being service-oriented and very compassionate and basically living for the benefit of others. Because